All right, what's up, guys? This video is going to be about Honda's ATV lineup and what are the differences between them. I frequently get people that are confused between the different transmission types. So everyone knows what a foot shift is. That's the one everyone wants for mudding. It's very simple and reliable. That's what's in most of my videos. But Honda's got a lot of other transmissions than the foot shift, and people frequently confuse electric shift, the double clutch transmission, and the torque converter automatic transmission. So all those transmissions are actually still around. There are some older transmissions, like in the old Rubicon, like the early 2000s Rubicon. We're not going to talk about some of the older ones. This video is going to focus on the new BS, or new body style Hondas, like 2015 and up. So if you go on Honda's website, here are your four models here. So you've got a Rancher, you got a Foreman, you got a Foreman Rubicon, aka independent suspension Foreman, and then you've got this new Foreman Rubicon Automatic, which is really just a Rincon. So I'm going to break down the transmissions and the engines in each of these machines for you. This is common knowledge to people that work on these things, but if you're new to ATVs or if you're looking to buy a gear reduction and you haven't done this kind of stuff before, a lot of people are confused about what parts fit in which motors. So right off the bat, I will tell you that I have a lot of this information on the Tarachi website. So if you go on here and you go down to product information, look at fitment here, anything that's under fitment on this gear reduction is what I call the old school Honda-matic transmission. That's the one that's got, a centrifugal clutch, a disc clutch. It's very similar to what was in the Honda 300 and the Big Red 250 back in the 80s, and Honda still has a similar transmission around. So this model fitment right here will tell you if you have one of the most common transmissions. I'm going to call it the old school Honda transmission, and if you have that transmission, most gear reductions will fit in it. If you have one of the other transmissions, it's a little more complicated. There's not as many options. And generally, these are the transmissions you want for mudding. But that was just a shameless plug for my gear reduction there. Let me go back to the Honda website. So there are currently 3 major engine transmission types available from Honda right now. So we're going to start with this one right here, which they're calling a Rubicon for 2025. Ever since 2006 to 2024, it was called a Rincon. So that is this engine right here. It's a kind of a neat engine. It's a 3-speed automotive style automatic. What I mean by that is it has a torque converter and it uses the engine oil as a hydraulic fluid to operate clutches, to drive the torque converter, and as you can see, it has solenoids on it. So this transmission needs good oil pressure to function at all. You can also see this cut out here. This is an overhead cam engine with a 4-valve head. It actually has a big timing chain up here. So the Rincon is the most badass Honda ATV as far as speed. Unfortunately, it only has 3 gears, and it's not geared very low, so you can't turn a big tire. I've got a chart I'll show you later with all the gearing. But I just want you to be able to recognize the engine. So you see this engine? This is a TRX 680 FA. F stands for 4-wheel drive, A stands for automatic. So this is an automatic transmission. It does have a manual mode, but it's kind of a wacky transmission. And I work on a lot of these, and a lot of my friends have them. Don't get water in this transmission. It can get very expensive very quickly. You have to maintain the proper oil level in here, and you have to maintain the filters. If you look inside this transmission, this is what it looks like. Basically, it's like an Honda-style automotive transmission where you have a clutch for each of the 3 gears, and you can see all these seals in the shaft here. Everything's operated by oil pressure. You don't have traditional clutch springs like a dirt bike. So when I say the old school Honda transmissions, those are pretty similar to how dirt bike transmissions are made. You have a clutch with some springs separated from a gearbox where you have some gears. This is something that came out in the early 2000s, and they are reliable if you maintain them. They are quick, but they are not great in mud. Okay, so that's Honda's flagship. It's been the most expensive ATV. That's the 680 automatic transmission. The next one we're going to talk about is the one that is the most common. So if you see this transmission right here, this is what you get in your Rancher 420, your Foreman 500, your 500 Rubicon, your Pioneer 500, Pioneer 520, all those engines look like this. This is a very old school design. The bottom end of this motor has been around for a long time. It used to be air cooled, and Honda made it liquid cooled. It's a very good engine for a couple reasons. Number one, it's simple. Right here you have a centrifugal clutch, and right here you have a disc clutch. You can adjust the disc clutch manually right here with this nut and this adjuster, and that makes it very nice to work on. These engines are one of the only, out of the ones we're going to talk about, this is the only engine that you can sink in mud, do an oil change on it, and keep riding it. The other ones typically require a lot more work. But again, this is the most common engine. It's just a 5-speed transmission with a centrifugal clutch and a disc clutch. And this is what the gear reduction that we sell, Tarachi gear reduction, fits. There's a lot of variants of this engine. So if you look on the front right here, you see this little gearbox. This is where your electric shift motor and gears would be if you had an ES or electric shift. So ES and FM, and they also call it FE for four-wheel drive electric, are all really similar, right? The only difference between electric shift and foot shift is that instead of your foot shifting the gears, an electric motor does it for you. But all the internal to the transmission and the engine are pretty much the same, and the gear ratios are pretty much the same. Now, the Rancher 420 and the Foreman 500 do have different gear ratios, and so does the newer Pioneer. So I'll show you a chart with all that information. But just to recognize the engine, that's what it looks like. And here's what the clutches look like. So you got your centrifugal clutch here, like I said, and your disc clutch here. Very simple. And when you do a gear reduction, you replace the primary gear and the clutch basket to get more torque. So that's the most common engine you're going to see in a Honda ATV, and that's probably the one you want if you go in deep mud and water. Okay, the last one we're going to talk about is the double clutch. So this is a TRX 420 FA. F stands for four-wheel drive, A stands for automatic. This is a totally different engine and transmission than the 680 FA. So if you look at it, it does have some solenoids on it. It has a valve body right here. It has an electric shift motor down here. So it has some components from the other two engines on it, right? You got an electric shift motor, you've got a valve body, and it kind of looks like this motor, right? With the way the coolant piping are and stuff. And that's because the top end's the same. But the transmission is totally different. So this has a double clutch transmission, and what that means is there's a center gear, and then you have clutches on both sides of the gear. Let's compare that to the regular one. You see you have a gear and one clutch basket. This one has two clutch baskets. That's why it's called double clutch. Like the Rincon 680, this engine requires oil pressure to function. It's what engages the clutches, and there's little spool valves that move around with solenoids, and it's a lot more complicated, and it's very sensitive to getting dirt or contamination in the oil. If your oil level's not right, these things don't shift right. They do weird stuff. I've had to rebuild a lot of these transmissions when people sink them. It's not fun. But this type of transmission is found in the Rancher 420 FA and the Foreman 500/520 FA. Again, it's reliable. Some people like it because it shifts fast. But if you get mud and water in it, it can be a disaster really quickly. Okay, so those are the three transmissions Honda has on the market currently. Just to touch on the side-by-sides briefly, this 680 engine is very similar to what's in the Pioneer 700. It does have a small gear reduction in the secondary cover. And this engine right here, this 500 FM engine, is very similar to the Pioneer 500. It just has electric shift on it. So this video is not really about side-by-sides, but you know, the side-by-sides, the 700 and the 500 really do use ATV engines, just to point that out. If we go on Honda's website and we look at the Rancher, for instance, we can go on here and we can go to select trim. For 2025, there's 4 trims of the Rancher. They have the foot shift variant, and they have the double clutch variant, or the automatic. And then if you get the automatic, you actually have an independent rear suspension option as well, which is pretty similar to the rear suspension on the back of the 500 Rubicon. Now look at 2024. Look how many models of the Rancher there were. It was really confusing in 2024. We used to have electric shift, and we had the automatic double clutch, and we had the foot shift and every variant in between. So I understand why people get confused with these models. Honda's marketing has been kind of weird lately, and the weirdest thing they did was they changed the name on the Rincon to Rubicon. Hopefully that's because they are coming out with a badass Rincon for us and they needed to free up the name. I don't know. But I just wanted to go through all that. And now, if you don't like spreadsheets, you can stop watching the video because this is the boring part. Well, I think it's the useful part. But this is a spreadsheet of the new body style Honda ATVs. So like we were talking about the old school tranny, if it says yes as an old school tranny, that's the more you know, dirt bike inspired transmission that Honda's been making for 30, 40 years now. And if it doesn't say that, it's the new automatics. So I have all the different models here. Obviously, I didn't break them down into electric shift versus non-electric shift and all that. I kind of focused on the engine changes here. And the most important thing to look at when you're going to buy a Honda is your gear ratios. So these are the lowest gear ratio. I went through and calculated these using a Honda manual. If you look in the manual, this is a 500 Foreman manual here. It gives you all the gear splits for the FM FE model and then the FA model. So I went through and calculated all that from the manual and put it into here. So this is the lowest ratio. This is when you're in first gear, and this is how many RPMs, how many rotations of the crankshaft happen for one rotation of the tire when you're in first gear. So you see the Rancher 420 is 46.5 to 1. It's pretty low. The Rancher 420 AT, or the FA, the DCT Rancher, is geared much higher. I do not recommend messing with those for mudding because, well, they're just geared high and they're more complicated. The 500s both have a very low ratio, but if you get the 500 DCT, which is similar to the Rancher DCT, but it adds a high and low shifter on the back of the motor, you actually get a slight gear reduction over a regular 500, like a foot shift, because of the low gear. So that's cool, but again, I don't really recommend it because it's not that much lower and it's complicated. The Rincon 680, or the Pioneer 700, or what Honda's calling the Rubicon now, has the highest gear ratio by far. 17.7 turns of the crankshaft to 1 turn of the wheel. That means that these Foremans over here put down about 3 times as much torque. It's not that simple because the Rincon has a torque converter which acts like a stall and is a torque multiplier. Also, the Rincon has a higher output engine. But it's safe to say that the Foreman 500 in first gear will put down about twice as much torque as a 680 Rincon in first gear. If you've owned a Rincon, you know if you throw some 28-inch mud tires on it, it's going to bog and not go anywhere. Now, you can put the Pioneer 700 gears in the Rincon motor for like a 28% gear reduction. That used to be a popular mod, not so much anymore because people just buy the Honda Rubicon. Anyway, I also put the Pioneer 500 on here, so it's the P5. The first years of the Pioneer 500 were geared lower than the 2017 Plus. The lowest gear ratio on this chart, 68 to 1. Incredibly low crawl ratio. That's why I bought a 2015, obviously. And these two get kind of confusing. So the 15 to 16 Pioneer 500 has the same engine and transmission as the newer one. The only difference is Honda updated the software on the 17 Plus, and it has an automatic mode. But this is what confuses people. The automatic Pioneer is not a double clutch transmission. It is a regular foot shift transmission with an electric motor slapped onto it to turn the shifter, just like any of these ES models. So I'm going to say that again. Pioneer 500 is not double clutch. It is an ES. Now, it has an automatic mode, which is confusing, but it's still not a double clutch. It's just the computer banging the gears for you. That's all there is to it. I also went down to put horsepower down here. Obviously, they're all about 27 horsepower, 28 horsepower, except for the Rincon, which makes significantly more power at 38 horsepower. Again, 4-valve head, more displacement. It's got more power. Unfortunately, it's not geared low enough. I put a note up here. The 520 models add 1 to 2 horsepower. No one's really dynoed them or anything that I know, but I've owned both of them back and forth. And the Pioneer 500 to 520, there's not that much of a difference. Okay, training type. So if it says FM, that's four-wheel drive manual, aka foot shift. If it says FE, that's four-wheel drive electric, aka electric shift or push-button shift. If it says FA or AT, that means it's automatic. If it's a 420 automatic, it's a DCT. If it's a 500 automatic, it's a DCT. If it's a 680 automatic, it's a torque converter style automotive transmission. And like I said earlier, the Pioneer 500s are both paddle shift, but if you have a 2017 Plus, it also has an automatic mode. Side note, I don't really like the 2017 Plus. It's geared higher, and they can shift kind of funny when you do gear reduction. Some of them just don't shift right because the computer is more sensitive to gearing changes because of that automatic programming. So I prefer my old school Pioneer. Independent suspension, most of these don't have it. The automatic option of the Foreman or the Rancher 420 has an option for independent suspension, which is the same suspension off the back of the Rubicon 500, and also the 680 only comes in independent suspension. And of course the side-by-sides are all independent suspension. Front locker, only the 500s on this list have the front locker. You do not get a front locker on a Rancher. You do not get a front locker on a Pioneer. Of course, you can do a spool or a torque locker if you have the Pioneer. And then high and low. The only one on this list that has high and low is the Foreman 500/Foreman 520 automatic. It has a high and low gear, which is cool. I wish they would do that to the 680. Then I would probably buy one. But I don't think Honda made the low range quite low enough, because you can see here it's 56.5 to 52.5. So hopefully that was useful information for you guys. I'm going to go to this sheet here to show you where I calculated stuff. So if we go over to this part, this is me calculating the foot shift, or let's call it the FM, versus the FA. So this is the DCT Rubicon with low. So you can see it's got a lower crawl ratio, 56.5 versus 52.5. By the way, if you see some of these numbers that are off or a little bit or whatever, it's because some people use the rear diff, some people use the front diff ratio. If you look at the Honda sheet over here, you can see that the front and rear diffs has slightly different ratios. Some people don't realize that, but Honda puts a lower ratio in the front diff because the OEM tires are a little smaller and it helps handling in four-wheel drive. Anyway, I digress. So if we do the math here, divide this by this, okay, it's only a 7.62% difference between the double clutch Rubicon and the foot shift Rubicon. 7.6% is not enough for me to justify all the extra complication and having two clutches and having, valve bodies and stuff. So I don't mess with the double clutch Rubicon personally. If you look over here, this is the Pioneer 500 gear comparison. So 2015 to 16 compared to 2017. You can see that the 2015 to 16 comes out with a 68-to-1 total crawl ratio, which is pretty outstanding. My chart got kind of bumped here. Let me fix this. Okay, comes out to 68-to-1, pretty outstanding low gears. But if you have a newer Pioneer, you only get 56-to-1. If we do that math right here, you see, divide big by the small, it's a 21% difference. So the old Pioneer 500 is geared 21% lower than the new Pioneer 500, primarily because first gear is a big difference, but they also put a different secondary in there as well. Okay, so hopefully I didn't talk your head off too much with all that. That's a lot of gear reduction stuff, questions I get all the time. I wanted to put it in a video, so when people ask the question, I can just send them a video instead of typing up a whole paragraph to reply to their YouTube comment. I spend way too much time answering questions on YouTube. It's like my addiction or something. I don't know. But yeah, that should break it down for you guys. Again, the best resource if you're looking to find this information is go spend $5, download a Honda OEM service manual like this one right here. All the information's right here. All the gears, the reverse. This one's got the high, the low, and the drive gear because it's got high and low on the Rubicon. But you definitely want to get the right manual. So you want to get one that looks like this, Honda Service Manual. This has all the information you need. I have these for every model, and that's where I get the information to make these charts from because it's the most reliable source. I'm not saying it's perfect. I have found typos and things like that, but in general, it's pretty dang good. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, please comment below.